Dad, I can help, 8-year-old Alexander Sterling says quietly as he steps into the Sterling Investment Bank conference room. CEO Richard Sterling's face turns red with embarrassment. His $800 million merger is collapsing because their interpreter canceled, and now his autistic son, the child he calls broken, has wandered into the most important meeting of his career. Alexander, get out now, Richard hisses through clenched teeth. But Alexander turns to the Japanese executives with perfect confidence and speaks in flawless Japanese, offering to help translate for them. The room falls silent. Richard's jaw drops. His supposedly non-verbal son just spoke perfect Japanese. As Alexander seamlessly translates between Japanese, German, Portuguese, and French, saving the deal that seemed impossible, Richard stares in shock. This is the same child everyone said would never communicate normally. But who taught him 5 languages? When Richard discovers the truth about their black maid, he'll break down in tears. 8 months earlier, the Sterling penthouse stretched across the 52nd floor of Manhattan's most exclusive building, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park like a throne room surveying conquered territory. Every surface gleamed with old money confidence, Italian marble, Persian rugs worth more than most people's houses, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow shadows across walls lined with portraits of Sterling ancestors. Richard Sterling stood in his home office adjusting his Armani tie while barking orders into his phone. At 45, he embodied everything Wall Street worshipped: ruthless ambition wrapped in custom suits, inherited wealth polished to a mirror shine, and the kind of cold efficiency that turned human suffering into quarterly profits. His grandfather built Sterling Investment Bank from nothing. His father expanded it globally. Richard intended to make it immortal. I don't care if the Seoul office is burning down, he snapped into the phone. The merger documents need to be perfect by Monday, or you're all replacements. Through his office window, he could see his son Alexander sitting alone in the corner of the living room, surrounded by scattered Lego blocks but not playing with them. Just staring. Always staring at nothing, lost in a world Richard couldn't understand and frankly didn't want to. Alexander Sterling, 8 years old, had been diagnosed with severe autism 3 years ago, shortly before his mother Sarah died in the car accident that shattered what little warmth remained in the Sterling household. The boy rarely spoke, never made eye contact, and seemed to live behind an invisible wall that no amount of money could break down. Richard had hired 15 different specialists, spent over $500,000 on treatments, therapies, and experimental programs. Nothing worked. He's broken, Richard often told his sister Victoria during their weekly dinners. Some things just can't be fixed. Victoria Sterling Hamilton nodded in agreement, her Botoxed face incapable of showing real emotion even if she possessed any. At 42, she had perfected the art of weaponized privilege, using her inheritance and social connections like a sword to cut down anyone who threatened her carefully constructed world. Her husband owned 3 country clubs where membership required both millions and the right skin color, though they'd never admit the second part out loud. You need better help, Victoria said, sipping her champagne. Someone who understands boundaries. These people today think they can just interact with our children like equals. Margaret Sterling, Richard's 72-year-old mother, presided over the family like an aging queen who'd forgotten the empire had crumbled. Her blue blood ran so pure it had crystallized into ice, and she spoke about the help with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned whether other human beings actually counted as human. In my day, we knew how to handle their kind, Margaret often said, her voice dripping with the kind of racism that hid behind words like tradition and proper order. Clear boundaries, firm expectations, none of this modern nonsense about treating them like family. Into this frozen wasteland of inherited hatred walked Carmen Rivera. The employment agency had sent her over on a Tuesday morning, arriving through the service entrance as instructed. At 42, Carmen moved with quiet dignity despite her worn clothes and nervous energy. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the hostility that radiated from every marble surface, but her eyes, intelligent, observant, infinitely sad, missed nothing. 15 years of housekeeping experience, Victoria read from Carmen's resume, her tone suggesting she was reading a criminal record. Previous employment with discreet families who value privacy. She looked Carmen up and down like she was inspecting livestock. Can you follow instructions without asking unnecessary questions? Yes, ma'am, Carmen replied softly, her slight accent betraying her Puerto Rican heritage. Good, because we have very specific rules in this household. You'll use the service entrance only. No personal phone calls during work hours. You're not to interact with our son beyond what's absolutely necessary for cleaning his areas. And, Victoria paused for effect, random bag searches are part of our security protocol. I hope that won't be a problem. Carmen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she nodded. I understand, ma'am. What none of them understood was that hidden in Carmen's worn purse, wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from the rain, was a Harvard Medical School diploma that read, Dr. Carmen Rivera, Ph.D. in Speech and Language Pathology. Beside it, a faded newspaper clipping from 4 years ago. Breakthrough Autism Research wins international recognition. But that was before Sophia died, before the lawsuits and investigations destroyed her career, before she lost everything that mattered and learned that genius means nothing when grief makes you unemployable. Now she needed this job, no matter how much it hurt her soul. As she watched Alexander sitting alone in his corner, methodically arranging Lego blocks in precise mathematical patterns that revealed a brilliant mind trapped behind invisible walls, Carmen's heart broke and mended simultaneously. She recognized something in the boy that his family never bothered to see. He wasn't broken. He was extraordinary. But first, she'd have to survive their hatred long enough to prove it. How long could she endure their cruelty while secretly healing the child they'd given up on? The war against Carmen Rivera began on her third day. Margaret Sterling stood in the kitchen doorway like a general surveying a battlefield, her cold blue eyes tracking every movement as Carmen wiped down the granite countertops. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed to avoid Margaret entirely, as if even light knew better than to touch something so frozen inside. Girl! Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. Carmen looked up, her hands still clutching the cleaning cloth. Use the paper plates for your lunch. Good china is for family only. Carmen nodded quietly, reaching for the stack of disposable plates while Margaret's friends, 3 other wealthy widows who treated cruelty like a competitive sport, watched from the breakfast nook. Oh, Margaret, you're so generous letting her eat inside, Mrs. Pemberton tittered, her diamond rings catching the light as she gestured with her coffee cup. Most of us make them eat in the garage. Well, I'm not heartless, Margaret replied, as if basic human dignity was an act of charity. Though some would say I'm too soft. The women laughed like hyenas sharing a kill. Victoria appeared in the kitchen, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like bullets. She surveyed the scene with satisfaction before turning to Carmen with the kind of smile that drew blood. Carmen, dear, Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness, I need you to understand something very important. You're here to clean and cook, nothing more. I don't want you talking to Alexander, playing with him, or filling his head with any of your ideas. He has proper specialists for his condition. Carmen's hands tightened on the cleaning cloth. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Good. Because people like you sometimes forget your place and think you can just insert yourselves into situations where you don't belong. The words hit Carmen like physical blows, but she forced herself to nod. She needed this job. She needed to survive long enough to help Alexander, even if it meant swallowing poison every single day. By the second week, the systematic humiliation had evolved into an art form. Carmen arrived at 5 in the morning and left after 10 at night, using only the service entrance and the staff bathroom in the basement. She wasn't allowed to use the main elevator, forced instead to carry heavy supplies up 4 flights of service stairs. Her lunch breaks were spent alone in the garage, eating sandwiches while sitting on a folding chair between Richard's Bentley and Victoria's Mercedes. We can't have her using our bathroom, Victoria explained to her bridge club during one of their weekly gatherings. You never know what diseases they carry. It's just basic hygiene. The security cameras followed Carmen everywhere, and twice a week Margaret would demand to search her purse, spreading its contents across the kitchen counter like evidence at a crime scene. Can't be too careful, Margaret would say, pawing through Carmen's few possessions. They're naturally inclined toward taking things. But it was Alexander who broke Carmen's heart every single day. She could see him through doorways and around corners, this brilliant little boy who arranged his Lego blocks in complex mathematical sequences that would impress MIT professors. He never spoke, never made eye contact, but Carmen recognized the patterns he created, prime number sequences, Fibonacci spirals, geometric progressions that revealed a mind operating on levels his family couldn't even imagine. When Alexander had meltdowns, screaming, hitting himself, overwhelmed by sensory input, Carmen had to listen from the kitchen while expensive specialists failed to calm him down. Every instinct screamed at her to help, but Victoria's rules were absolute. No contact with the boy. The breaking point came during Carmen's third week, when she was cleaning the second-floor hallway and heard Alexander's desperate screams from his bedroom. The sound was different this time, not a meltdown, but genuine distress. Through the partially open door, she could see him backed into a corner, hitting his head against the wall hard enough to leave marks. Carmen's professional training overrode every survival instinct. She dropped her supplies and rushed into the room, immediately recognizing the signs of a severe sensory overload episode that could result in serious self-injury. "Shh, baby, it's okay," she whispered, gently but firmly applying pressure point therapy to his temples while positioning herself between Alexander and the wall. "Breathe with me. 1, 2, 3. Alexander's screaming stopped almost immediately. For the first time in months, he made direct eye contact with another human being. "There you are," Carmen smiled softly. "You're safe now." That's when Victoria walked in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Victoria's scream could have shattered windows. She grabbed Carmen by the arm and yanked her away from Alexander with such force that Carmen stumbled backward. "Ma'am, he was hurting himself. I had to—" "Get your hands off my nephew!" Victoria's face had turned purple with rage. "You have no right to touch him!" Richard appeared in the doorway, his cold eyes taking in the scene with the calculation of a predator. "Carmen, step away from my son, now." "But Mr. Sterling, he was in distress. I have experience with—" "You have experience cleaning." Richard's voice cut like ice. "You are not a doctor. You are not a therapist. You are the help." Alexander, who had been calm just moments before, began crying again as the adults raised their voices around him. "Look what you've done," Victoria snarled. "You've upset him even more. This is exactly why people like you shouldn't be around children." Carmen backed toward the door, her heart breaking as she watched Alexander retreat back into himself. "I'm sorry. I was just trying to help." "Your help isn't wanted," Richard said flatly. "Stay away from my son or you're fired." That night, Carmen sat alone in her tiny apartment, staring at the Harvard diploma hidden in her dresser drawer. She thought about her daughter Sophia, who had died during an experimental treatment that Carmen had recommended. She thought about the lawsuit, the investigation, the colleagues who abandoned her when the medical board stripped her license. She thought about walking away from the Sterling house and never looking back. But then she remembered Alexander's eyes in that moment of connection, the intelligence trapped behind walls of fear and misunderstanding. Tomorrow she will return. She would endure their hatred, swallow their cruelty, and find a way to help that brilliant little boy, even if it destroyed her in the process. What price would Carmen pay for trying to save a child his own family had given up on? 5 days after Carmen's firing, the Sterling penthouse had transformed into a battlefield where an 8-year-old boy waged war against everyone who tried to help him. Alexander hadn't eaten a full meal since Carmen left. He refused to sleep in his bed, instead curling up in the corner where he used to arrange his Lego blocks, which now lay scattered and untouched across his bedroom floor. The expensive specialists Richard had summoned, Dr. Henley from Mount Sinai, Dr. Rodriguez from Columbia, Dr. Carter from the city's most exclusive pediatric practice, stood helpless as Alexander screamed and hit himself whenever they approached. "This level of regression is highly unusual," Dr. Henley told Richard during their third emergency consultation. "Has anything significant changed in his environment recently?" Richard shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, avoiding the doctor's probing gaze. "We made some staffing changes." "What kind of staffing changes?" "We let go of our housekeeper." Dr. Henley raised an eyebrow. "Children with autism can form intense attachments to consistent caregivers. Sudden separation often triggers severe behavioral regression." She was just the help, Richard said defensively. She wasn't supposed to be attached to anything. But Alexander's behavior told a different story. On the third night, Richard found himself standing outside his son's bedroom at 2 in the morning, listening to the boy's quiet sobbing. When he finally worked up the courage to peek inside, what he saw stopped him cold. Alexander sat surrounded by scattered alphabet blocks, but instead of his usual random arrangements, he had spelled out words with desperate precision. "Carmen, help me." Richard's breath caught in his throat. "Alexander? Son, can you spell?" Alexander looked up at his father with eyes that seemed far too old for an 8-year-old face. For the first time in months, he spoke clearly. "Carmen taught me. Where is Carmen?" The words hit Richard like a physical blow. His supposedly non-verbal son had been learning to communicate, and he'd fired the person who made it possible. Meanwhile, across the city, Carmen Rivera sat on the narrow bed in her studio apartment, staring at the eviction notice in her trembling hands. 30 days to pay 3 months of back rent or face homelessness. The women's shelter had a waiting list, and her job search had produced nothing but closed doors and suspicious looks. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the handful of contacts that remained from her previous life. Dr. Sarah Carter, her former colleague at Harvard, had stopped returning her calls after the investigation. Dr. Martinez from Northwestern had been too busy to see her when she tried to explain what really happened with Sophia's treatment. The medical community had a long memory for scandal and a short memory for friendship. Carmen's fingers hovered over another number, the crisis hotline she'd called twice in the past month, when the weight of her failures felt too heavy to carry alone. But something made her stop. She reached into her dresser drawer and pulled out a faded newspaper clipping from 4 years ago. The headline read, "Local doctor's breakthrough treatment helps nonverbal autistic children communicate." Below it, a photo of Carmen in her white coat, smiling beside 5-year-old Marcus Williams, who had spoken his first words using her revolutionary therapy techniques. "I saved other children once," she whispered to herself. "Maybe I can save one more." The phone call came at 7 in the morning. Carmen almost didn't answer the unknown number, assuming it was another debt collector or landlord demanding money she didn't have. But something, desperation, hope, or simple curiosity made her pick up. "Dr. Rivera?" The voice was professional but urgent. "This is Jennifer Walsh, assistant to Richard Sterling. Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you regarding your previous employment." Carmen's heart raced. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake. Mr. Sterling made it very clear that my services were no longer needed." "Ma'am, the situation has changed. Would you be available to meet with Mr. Sterling this morning?" 2 hours later, Carmen stood outside the imposing glass tower that housed Sterling Investment Bank, clutching the small purse that contained her last $27 and the hidden remnants of her former life. She'd worn her best clothes, a simple black dress that had seen better days but still looked professional, and tried to prepare herself for whatever humiliation Richard Sterling had planned. She expected to be led to a service entrance or made to wait in some basement office. Instead, the security guard escorted her directly to the executive floor, where Richard Sterling waited in his mahogany-paneled office, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Sit down," he said without preamble, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. Carmen remained standing. "Mr. Sterling, if this is about pressing charges or my son hasn't eaten in 5 days. Richard's voice cracked slightly. "He keeps spelling your name with his blocks. He's asking for you." Carmen felt her heart skip. "Alexander is spelling? And speaking? You knew he could do that?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "How?" Carmen chose her words carefully. "Children with autism often have hidden abilities. Sometimes they just need the right approach to unlock them." Richard leaned forward, his desperation bleeding through his usual cold facade. "What kind of approach?" "Patience, understanding, consistency." Carmen paused, then added quietly, "Respect." The word hung between them like a challenge. Richard stared at her for a long moment, probably weighing his pride against his son's welfare. Pride lost. "I need you to come back," he said finally. "I'll pay you triple your previous salary." Carmen shook her head. "This isn't about money, Mr. Sterling." "Then what is it about?" It's about treating Alexander like the brilliant child he is, not like a problem to be managed. And it's about treating me like a professional, not like—" She paused. "Like the help." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine. Whatever you think he needs." Carmen studied his face, looking for signs of the same cruelty she'd endured for weeks. Instead, she saw something she'd never expected: fear. Richard Sterling was terrified of losing his son, and that fear had cracked open his armor just enough to let in a sliver of humanity. "I'll need access to Alexander during his calm periods," Carmen said. "No restrictions on interaction, and no more surveillance when I'm working with him." Richard hesitated, then nodded again. As Carmen gathered her purse to leave, Richard called after her. "Carmen, what you did before, helping him when he was hurting himself. How did you know what to do?" Carmen turned back, her hand on the door handle. For just a moment, she considered telling him the truth about her Harvard training, her years of research, the breakthrough techniques she'd developed. Instead, she simply said, "I pay attention, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes that's all a child needs." What Richard didn't know was that Carmen had just made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Hidden in her purse, wrapped carefully in plastic, was a worn notebook titled Revolutionary Autism Therapy Techniques, Dr. Carmen Rivera, Harvard Medical School. Tomorrow, the real work will begin. Carmen Rivera returned to the Sterling penthouse the next morning with quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. She wasn't just the help anymore. She was Alexander's lifeline, and everyone could feel the shift in power. Richard met her at the main entrance instead of directing her to the service door. Victoria watched from the second-floor balcony, her fingers gripping the railing as Carmen walked through the front door like she belonged there. "Alexander is in his room," Richard said carefully. "He hasn't come out since yesterday." Carmen nodded, hearing the rhythmic tapping from upstairs, stimming behavior, not screaming. Good. He was self-regulating. "I'll need some basic supplies," she said. "Colored paper, markers, building blocks in different textures." Richard started to protest the expense, then caught himself. "Whatever you need." Carmen climbed the main staircase for the first time, her worn shoes silent against marble steps. Behind her, Victoria whispered urgent phone calls to Margaret. She knocked gently on Alexander's door. "Alexander, it's Carmen, I'm back." The tapping stopped. After a long moment, "Carmen, really? Really, may I come in?" Alexander threw his arms around her waist, holding on like she might disappear again. "I thought you were gone forever." "I'm here now," Carmen said softly, "and I'm going to help you learn amazing things." Over the following days, Carmen implemented techniques she'd perfected during her Harvard research years. She disguised therapy as play, using sensory learning methods that seemed like games. "Red block," she would say. In Spanish, rojo. In Japanese, akai. In German, rot. Alexander's brilliant mind absorbed everything. Within a week, he was creating patterns that incorporated linguistic concepts and mathematical sequences. "Blue triangle means azul triangle," Alexander announced, his confidence growing. "And 3 blue triangles is tres triángulos azules." But their progress didn't go unnoticed. Margaret Sterling arrived Thursday morning with Dr. Peterson, a child psychologist whose conservative approach aligned with her prejudices. "I understand the domestic help has been providing unauthorized intervention," Dr. Peterson said. They found Carmen and Alexander surrounded by colored cards, building blocks, and drawings. To Margaret's eyes, chaos. To Dr. Peterson, unprofessional. "Young man," Dr. Peterson approached Alexander clinically, "I'd like to conduct assessments." Alexander immediately shut down, withdrawing and refusing eye contact. Dr. Peterson pulled out standardized tests designed for neurotypical children. "Can you point to the red circle?" Silence. "Let's try simpler. Can you say your name?" More silence. "This is exactly what I feared," Dr. Peterson told Margaret. "The child has been overstimulated by amateur methods. Untrained intervention causes developmental regression." "You see?" Margaret said triumphantly. "She's been filling his head with nonsense." Richard walked in, hearing the commotion. "What's going on?" "We're conducting proper evaluation," Dr. Peterson replied. "The results are concerning. This child shows severe developmental delays." Richard looked at the son curled unresponsively in his chair. "Alexander?" No response. Dr. Peterson is right, Margaret said, shooting Carmen a satisfied look. Carmen felt familiar helplessness settling over her, once again watching a child be misunderstood by adults who couldn't see past their limitations. Then Richard did something unexpected. "Carmen," he said quietly. "Could you try?" Margaret gasped. "Richard, we have a qualified professional." "Could you try?" Richard repeated. Carmen approached Alexander slowly, sitting beside his chair without touching him. "Alexander, would you like to show Dr. Peterson our color game?" Alexander peeked up, then shook his head. "That's okay. How about just for me? What color is this block?" She held up blue Lego. "Blue," Alexander whispered. "And in Spanish, azul. Japanese, aoi. German, blau." Dr. Peterson's mouth fell open. "Very good. Now, can you count to 10? Alexander straightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Complete silence. "How many languages does he know?" Richard whispered. 5 so far, Carmen replied. "He's working on French." "Bonjour," Alexander said proudly, making eye contact with his father. "That means hello." Dr. Peterson stared at the child he'd declared developmentally delayed. Margaret's face turned purple. Victoria looked like she'd seen a ghost. Richard knelt beside his son. "When did you learn this?" "Carmen taught me," Alexander said simply. "She makes learning fun." Margaret sputtered. "This is impossible. She's just a housekeeper." Alexander looked at his grandmother directly. "Carmen isn't just anything, Grandma. She's the smartest person I know." The challenge was issued. Battle lines drawn. For the first time since arriving, Carmen felt like she might be winning. How long before they discovered her secret? The morning of the Sterling Investment Bank merger meeting, Carmen woke with a knot in her stomach. Today felt different. Dangerous. Like standing at a cliff's edge, knowing one wrong step would send everything tumbling. At Sterling Investment Bank, Richard paced his office like a caged predator. The merger with International Holdings represented everything. $800 million, expansion into 5 markets, legacy cementing the Sterling name. "Sir, we have a problem," his assistant Jennifer announced, face pale. "All 3 interpreters canceled. Food poisoning from the same restaurant." Richard's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean, all 3? Japanese, German, and Portuguese translators. All hospitalized. Then find others." Richard slammed his desk. "I've tried for 2 hours. The meeting starts in 90 minutes. Richard stared at Manhattan's skyline, watching his empire teeter on collapse's edge. Without translation, international investors would walk. 2 years of negotiations would evaporate. Meanwhile, 60 floors below, Carmen conducted what might be her final lesson with Alexander. "Today is important," she told him. "Your father has a big meeting with people from other countries." Alexander looked up from his geometric block pattern. "Like ones who speak different languages?" "Exactly, Japanese people, German people, Brazilian people who speak Portuguese." "I know those languages," Alexander said matter-of-factly. Carmen's heart raced as an impossible idea formed. "What if you could help your father today?" "How?" "By showing everyone how smart you really are." Alexander considered this seriously. "Would Daddy be proud?" Oh, sweetheart, he would be so proud his heart might burst. An hour later, Richard sat in his conference room with 8 powerful international investors, watching his life's work crumble. Yamamoto-san checked his watch irritably. "Mr. Sterling, we cannot proceed without translation." Muller nodded gravely. "This unprofessionalism raises serious questions about your organization's reliability." Silva was gathering his papers. "Perhaps we should reschedule." "Gentlemen, please," Richard's voice cracked. The conference room door opened quietly. Alexander Sterling, 8 years old, stepped inside wearing his best blue shirt and newfound confidence. "Dad," Alexander said clearly, "I heard you need help." Richard flushed with embarrassment. "Alexander, not now." But Alexander had turned to face the investors with natural poise. "Good morning, Yamamoto-san," Alexander said, bowing slightly. He continued in perfect Japanese, introducing himself and offering to translate. The room went silent. Yamamoto-san's eyes widened as flawless Japanese flowed from the American child's lips. "You speak Japanese?" Yamamoto-san asked in his native language. "Yes, sir." Alexander replied fluently. And German, Portuguese, French, and Spanish. Muller leaned forward skeptically. You truly speak German? Alexander switched languages seamlessly, addressing Muller's concerns about merger terms. Silva nearly dropped his briefcase. And Portuguese. Of course, Alexander said in perfect Brazilian Portuguese. Richard sat frozen, staring at his son, the child he'd dismissed as broken, as Alexander conducted conversations in 5 languages with diplomatic ease. How is this possible? Richard whispered. Alexander turned to his father with sparkling eyes. Carmen taught me, Daddy. She said learning languages would help me understand the world. Carmen, our housekeeper. She's not just a housekeeper, Dad. She's the smartest person I've ever met. The words hit Richard like physical blows. He thought about months of watching Carmen endure his family's cruelty while she quietly performed miracles. Mr. Sterling, Yamamoto-san said softly, your son is extraordinary. Where did he receive such training? Richard opened his mouth, then realized he had no idea. He'd dismissed Carmen as beneath notice, never asking about her background. As Alexander flawlessly translated complex merger documents, saving the deal and Richard's reputation, one devastating thought echoed, who was Carmen Rivera really? The revelation that would destroy his world was about to unfold. For the next 3 hours, 8-year-old Alexander Sterling became the most important person in the room, seamlessly translating between 5 languages as billion-dollar deals hung on his every word. Richard watched in stunned silence as his supposedly broken son navigated complex financial terminology with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. The Japanese consortium agrees to the Southeast Asian expansion terms, Alexander announced, his young voice carrying the weight of corporate empires. But Mr. Yamamoto wants to clarify the profit-sharing structure in the third-quarter projections. Muller nodded approvingly as Alexander switched to German, explaining intricate banking regulations with precision that would have impressed university professors. Silva from Brazil leaned forward, completely absorbed as the boy translated Portuguese financial law with fluency that seemed impossible for someone his age. Remarkable, Yamamoto-san whispered to his colleague in Japanese. This child understands concepts that most adults struggle with. Alexander smiled and responded in Japanese. My teacher says understanding comes from patience and practice. Your teacher must be extraordinary, Yamamoto-san replied. She is, Alexander said simply. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and signed agreements, Richard felt like he was living in someone else's life. The merger was saved, his reputation was intact, and his son, the child he'd written off as a failure, had become the hero of the story. But the questions burning in his mind demanded answers. After the investors left, Richard found himself alone in his office with Alexander, staring at the boy as if seeing him for the first time. Alexander, Richard said slowly, who exactly is Carmen? She's my teacher, Dad. She helps me learn things. But what kind of teacher? What's her background? Alexander shrugged with 8-year-old innocence. She's really smart. She knows about brains and how they work. She says my brain is special, not broken. What else has she told you? She had a little girl once, but she died. That's why Carmen is sad sometimes. But she says helping me makes her feel better. Richard's chest tightened. He'd employed this woman for months, treated her like disposable help, never once asking about her life or qualifications. That evening, Richard returned to the penthouse to find his family in crisis mode. Victoria and Margaret sat in the living room like generals planning a war, their faces twisted with fury and disbelief. This is unacceptable, Victoria hissed as Richard walked in. That woman has been conducting unauthorized experiments on Alexander behind our backs. She's manipulating him, Margaret added, her voice dripping with venom, making him perform tricks to ingratiate herself with this family. Those weren't tricks, Richard said quietly. Alexander saved my business today. Don't you see? Victoria stood up, her designer dress crackling with static electricity from her agitation. She's been planning this. She's trying to make herself indispensable so she can sue us or blackmail us or God knows what else these people do when they get their claws into wealthy families. These people? Richard's voice carried a warning. You know what I mean, Victoria snapped. She's obviously not what she appears to be. No simple housekeeper could teach a child 5 languages. She's been lying to us from day one. Margaret nodded vigorously. I've been saying it for months. There's something shifty about that woman. Mark my words, she has an agenda. As if summoned by their accusations, Carmen appeared in the doorway, still wearing her simple work clothes, unaware that her world was about to explode. Mr. Sterling, she said softly, I wanted to check on Alexander before I left for the day. Actually, Richard said, his voice carefully controlled, I think we need to talk. All of us. Carmen's face went pale, but she stepped into the living room like a defendant approaching the gallows. Sit down, Richard commanded. Carmen remained standing. If this is about Alexander's appearance at your meeting, I can explain. Oh, you're going to explain a lot more than that, Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass, starting with who you really are. I don't understand. Stop lying, Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. No ordinary housekeeper teaches children 5 languages fluently. No cleaning lady understands complex autism therapy. You've been deceiving us from the beginning. Carmen's hands trembled as she clutched her worn purse. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, lay the evidence that would either save or destroy her. I never lied about anything, Carmen said quietly. Bullshit, Victoria snarled. You applied as a housekeeper with 15 years of domestic experience, yet somehow you've turned my nephew into some kind of linguistic prodigy. Either you're a fraud or you're something much more dangerous. Richard studied Carmen's face, looking for tells, for cracks in whatever facade she'd been maintaining. Carmen, I'm going to ask you directly. What are your qualifications? What's your real background? The moment stretched like a tightrope over an abyss. Carmen knew that whatever she said next would change everything forever. She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out the item she'd kept hidden for months, a Harvard Medical School diploma, a Yale certificate in child psychology, published research papers, and a faded newspaper clipping with the headline, Local Doctor's Revolutionary Autism Treatment Saves Lives. The documents fluttered to the coffee table like bombs dropping on enemy territory. My name is Dr. Carmen Rivera, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I have a PhD in speech and language pathology from Harvard Medical School. I developed breakthrough therapy techniques for autistic children that were published in the Journal of Developmental Medicine. I was head of pediatric speech therapy at Boston Children's Hospital before... Her voice broke slightly. Before my daughter Sophia died during an experimental treatment I recommended. I lost my medical license, my job, my house, everything. I've been hiding ever since. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Margaret's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. Richard stared at the Harvard diploma as if it might bite him. You're a doctor, Richard whispered. I was a doctor, Carmen corrected. Now I'm just someone trying to help one more child before I give up completely. But why? Richard's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you tell us? Carmen looked at him with eyes full of pain and exhaustion. Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me any differently if you'd known? Or would you have just found new reasons to dismiss me? The question hung in the air like an accusation, because everyone in the room knew the answer. Victoria finally found her voice. This is impossible. You cleaned our toilets. You ate in the garage. I endured your racism and cruelty because I needed work and Alexander needed help, Carmen said simply. But mostly because I saw something in your son that you refused to see. Genius, not disability. Richard's legs gave out and he collapsed into his chair. For months, he'd been calling a Harvard PhD the help. He'd made her eat in the garage while she quietly revolutionized his son's life. Oh my God, he whispered. What have we done? Margaret, never one to admit fault, rallied for one final attack. This doesn't change anything. She deceived us. She should have what? Carmen's voice carried steel now. Should have announced my credentials so you could mock them? Should have demanded respect while you called me every racist slur you could think of? Should I expect human dignity from people who see my skin color and assume I'm worthless? Alexander appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. "Carmen?" he said nervously. "Are you okay?" Carmen's expression softened as she looked at the boy who had become her reason for surviving. "I'm fine, sweetheart, fine. Are you in trouble because you helped me?" The innocent question shattered what was left of Richard's composure. He began to cry, not the dignified tears of a man who'd lost a business deal, but the broken sobbing of someone who had discovered they were the monster in their own story. "No, Alexander," Carmen said gently. "You could never get me in trouble. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years." Alexander walked over and took Carmen's hand. "Carmen is the smartest person in the world, Dad. She taught me that being different makes you special, not broken." As Richard wept in his chair and his family stared in shock at the Harvard diploma on the coffee table, one truth became undeniable. The woman they'd treated like garbage was the genius who had saved them all. But would their recognition come too late to heal the damage they'd caused? The Sterling living room felt suffocating as truth settled over its occupants like a heavy blanket. Richard's sobs echoed off marble walls while Alexander stood beside Carmen, gripping her hand. Victoria stared at the Harvard diploma, her makeup streaking. "We made you eat in the garage," she whispered. "You made me use a separate bathroom," Carmen replied quietly. "You searched my belongings like I was a criminal." Margaret struggled to speak. "But you looked like..." "Like what, Mrs. Sterling? Like someone who deserved basic human dignity regardless of education? Like someone whose worth shouldn't be determined by skin color?" Alexander tugged Carmen's hand. "Why is everyone crying?" Carmen knelt to his level. "Sometimes grown-ups make big mistakes. When they realize how badly they've hurt someone, it makes them sad." "Did my family hurt you?" Carmen glanced at Richard, who stared at her with a broken expression. "They did hurt me, but you made the pain worth it. Watching you learn and grow healed my heart." Richard struggled to his feet. "Carmen, Dr. Rivera, doctor." "I don't know how to start with an apology." "I'm sorry," came out as a broken whisper. "So deeply sorry for the racism, the cruelty, for making you endure our hatred while you saved my son." Victoria stepped forward. "What I said, what I called you, there's no excuse. I was raised to think money and skin color determine worth, but that's no justification." Even Margaret crumbled. "I was wrong. Terribly, inexcusably wrong." Alexander looked at his crying family. "Carmen, can you forgive them?" Carmen considered it seriously. "Forgiveness isn't about them, Alexander. It's about not letting other people's mistakes poison your heart. Yes, I can forgive them, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." "What do you want from us?" Richard asked. "I want Alexander to continue his education with proper resources and respect. I want this family to understand that value isn't determined by job title or skin color." "Stay," Alexander said suddenly. "Please keep teaching me." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "I would love that more than anything." Richard nodded eagerly. "Yes, as Alexander's therapist, his teacher, with proper compensation and formal apologies." Carmen smiled without hiding pain for the first time in months. The Sterling family emerged shattered but reborn, forever changed by recognizing their capacity for both cruelty and redemption. 6 months later, the Sterling penthouse had transformed from a cold marble mausoleum into something warm and alive. Laughter echoed through rooms that had known only whispered cruelties and frozen silences. Carmen Rivera walked through the front door each morning, greeted by Alexander's excited, "Good morning, Dr. Carmen," as he practiced conversational French over pancakes that Margaret had learned to make herself. The transformation hadn't come without pain. The story leaked to the press within days. Wall Street CEO's family abuses Harvard PhD they hired as Maid dominated headlines for weeks. Richard's business associates whispered in boardrooms about the Sterling family's situation. Some canceled dinner invitations, but Richard found that losing approval from racists felt more like liberation than punishment. Victoria suffered the most dramatic social exile. Her wealthy socialite friends abandoned her with swift cruelty after a viral video surfaced of her screaming racial slurs at Carmen, recorded by a neighbor's security camera. The country club revoked her membership. "I deserved it," Victoria told Carmen during their weekly conversations. I built my identity around feeling superior to others. When that got taken away, I had to figure out who I actually was underneath the hatred. Margaret's transformation shocked everyone most. At 72, she enrolled in community college courses on racial justice and volunteered at the women's shelter where Carmen had briefly stayed. I wasted 70 years believing terrible things about people I never bothered to know, Margaret confessed. I can't get those years back, but I can spend whatever time I have left doing better. The most visible change was in Alexander himself. Gone was the withdrawn, silent child who hid in corners. In his place stood a confident boy who served as Carmen's assistant, teaching other autistic children. My brain works differently, Alexander explained to Maya, a new 6-year-old student. But the difference isn't broken. Dr. Carmen taught me that being different can be a superpower. Carmen had reopened her practice, working with carefully selected families. The Sterling penthouse became a state-of-the-art learning center with specialized sensory rooms and multilingual libraries. Richard became Carmen's unlikely advocate, using business connections to fund autism research and speaking at conferences about recognizing hidden talents. Dr. Rivera didn't just save my son, Richard told conference audiences. She saved my soul. She forced me to confront the ugliest parts of myself and choose between comfortable hatred and uncomfortable growth. Other wealthy households quietly reassessed their treatment of domestic workers, terrified they might be harboring unrecognized genius while perpetuating shameful behavior. Carmen started a scholarship fund for women of color pursuing special education degrees funded by families who witnessed the Sterling transformation. The most profound changes appeared in small moments. Margaret teaching Alexander to bake while practicing German vocabulary. Victoria volunteered to drive families to therapy sessions. Richard read Spanish bedtime stories, laughing when Alexander corrected his pronunciation. "Carmen," Alexander said one evening, "do you think other kids like me are hiding in families that don't understand them yet?" Carmen smiled, thinking of children she had yet to meet, families who hadn't learned that love requires seeing people for who they truly are. "I think there are children everywhere, waiting for someone to believe in them," she replied. "And now we know how to help their families learn to see." The Sterling house had become a place where broken things were repaired, assumptions challenged, and love redefined as the courage to recognize humanity in everyone. 1 year later, Carmen Rivera stood in the same living room where she had once endured racial slurs and eaten off paper plates. Now she watched Alexander confidently teaching Spanish to 5 new children while their wealthy parents listened with genuine respect. "Blue block means block azul," Alexander explained to 6-year-old Marcus, whose autism had been dismissed as behavioral problems. "Try it!" Marcus, who hadn't spoken to his parents in months, carefully repeated the phrase. His mother began crying tears of joy. Richard Sterling entered carrying snacks, no longer the cold man who had called Carmen the help. He knelt to each child's level, asking about their progress with genuine care. Carmen watched with deep satisfaction. Every child here had been written off as hopeless. Every parent was told to lower expectations. Every family believed different meant less than. "The most powerful prisons," Carmen told the assembled parents, "are the ones we build in our minds. For months, you called me just a maid while I was a Harvard doctor. For years, you called your children broken while they were brilliant minds waiting to be unlocked." She gestured toward Alexander, now explaining geometry in 3 languages. Alexander's autism didn't disappear. His brilliance was always there. What changed was our willingness to see it, nurture it, celebrate it, instead of trying to fix it. Carmen's voice carried the authority of someone who survived humanity's worst and emerged with compassion intact. Every day we dismiss people because of skin color, accent, job title, or differences. We assume worth based on appearances, robbing ourselves of gifts they might offer. Alexander stood up. "Carmen taught me being different makes you special, not broken. She taught my dad that being wrong doesn't make you bad forever, just means you work harder to be better." Carmen smiled at the boy who had saved her from despair. "If this story moved you, remember that respect isn't earned by job title or bank account. It's given because someone is human. Look around you. Who are you overlooking? Who deserves a second glance, a kind word, a chance to show their worth? Share this story if you believe in second chances. Let it remind you that genius comes in all colors, all abilities, all backgrounds. Because sometimes the person you think needs saving might be the one who saves you. Alexander took Carmen's hand. And remember, love doesn't have a color. It just has courage. The room filled with applause for the hope this story represented, that any of us can choose to see beyond prejudices and discover extraordinary people hiding in plain sight.
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next Uncut Voice.